Charles, we are honored to have an extremely important guest with us today. We are joined by the legendary Seymour Hersh. Mr. Hersh, welcome to the show.
Legendary means I'm half dead, but that's okay. I'll live with it. It's better than the terrible.
Fully alive and still making news.
So if we may, Cy, you have a lot of options to publish stories and books. Why did you decide to get into this latest venture with Substack?
Well, because the truth is that the newspaper business has changed so much in the last decade. And when I was a kid, I did the My Lai story as a freelancer, and I couldn't sell it. Oh, I'm so sorry. I got to turn my phone off.
Sure.
I forgot to disconnect it. It just goes like crazy. So we can start again. I'm going to turn everything off. I've got a cell phone too. I'm going to shut down. Damn it, I forgot.
It's okay. We can keep going. Don't worry about it.
Well, all right, but but anyway, so the problem is that the business that I was in the 70s and 80s, particularly at the New York Times, it doesn't exist anymore. So I never considered. Since COVID, I've actually been doing a long-term historical project that was a lot of fun about containment and how we missed the boat totally. We went the wrong way in so many ways after World War II. But having said that, once I walked into this story, which is an important story, the Substack story about pipelines, there's just you couldn't go to the New York Times because the media has made a decision. Trump forced it on it, but it was already starting before that. It was very hard to write critically about Obama when I was doing stuff a decade ago because he was so revered by the liberal press. And so now we have, the Tucker Carlson and Fox News, and then we have the New York Post and other papers more conservative on one side, and the New York Times and the Washington Post on another side. And so to go to them, I mean, you might as well ask me, why aren't the Senate Democrats looking into this story, these allegations? Because, you've got a Democratic president and they're holding on for dear life on that. So I never considered any alternative media. I did publish for a long time with the London Review of Books, but then the wonderful publisher retired there. And so Substack, I didn't know much about it. I didn't know much about it, but my friend Matt Taibbi, who I've known for a long time, he used to write for the Rolling Stone, and he's a most interesting person. He's been doing stuff on Substack, and he told me, it's a great market. And I'll tell you, the story I did within a day had 20 million hits. I don't know what the right word is, which is extraordinary. And the people that respond are people from all political spectrums saying, thank God we finally got some good reporting going on, because there's been a lacuna, if you will. There's been a gap in coverage. I'll give you an example. I've been in the business 50 years, and since My Lai, the one thing that writing critically about that massacre did is there's a tremendous number of I knew this all along. I've been in the Army. I know there's very good officers. And there were a lot of good people and in the intelligence services too. And it's like the CIA, and even in the covert branch of it, who, when they take the oath of office, took it not to their boss, not to the general or the admiral, not to the president, but to the Constitution. And those guys have found their way to me for 50 years. And some are still friends of mine. I don't think I've outlived any of them. And so I just had no place to go. They all have the same view I have about what's going on in Ukraine, is that there isn't a chance in hell Ukraine will make it. It's a dead card. It's just not going to happen. Whether you like it, this is irrelevant of how we feel about Putin, or how we feel about, he's no longer a communist, how we feel about his vision of a Russia. And there's a lot of anger and hatred of him, but that has nothing to do with the fact that he hasn't yet committed one regular army unit to the war. And when he does, if he does, it's over. So I read 180% different point of view in the papers I subscribe to, the Washington Post and New York Times. I don't think they have the story right. Sometimes they'll have a glimmer of it's a little tougher than we think. And there was a story the other day that more and more people in America, the polls show, don't support what we're doing, what Biden is doing, what the Democratic Party is doing. And it's so odd for me that during Vietnam, the Democrats and a great number of Republican senators, moderate Republican senators, of which there's fewer in number, supported them. They were against the war and wrote the War Powers Act. That was basically written by a Republican governor from Kentucky, a wonderful person. And so that's gone. Now you have the Democrats are rabid supporters of the war. There's some Republicans that are not, but they're not the majority. And in the House, instead of focusing on that big issue, which is now controlled by the Republicans, they're running around chasing, Hunter Biden's, whatever his problems are. We're confronted with a president that seems to me to be dead set on continuing the war. And the worse it gets, the more he's going to dig in. And I don't know where that leads, but that's where the pipeline story has, I'm being, you can hear it in my voice. I'm inundated with particularly Europeans because they're very concerned. NATO and Western Europe and Germany have always felt that the United States has its back. But if the story that I wrote about America doing in the pipeline, one of which was controlled by the Germans, they had stopped it at our request, they sanctioned it. If the story, basically, the bottom line of the story, and we're getting to it very early, Charlie, because I know you know, I'm not telling you that you don't know. The bottom line is that Germany, a lot of people in Germany, and more in Western Europe, I mean, they're paying enormous prices, 3, 4 times, 5 times for the price for natural gas, or sometimes for the electricity that the natural gas provides for the turbines, the power plants with. They're coming into spring and summer, they'll survive, but next year it's going to be a disaster unless something happens. So what the president did in late September, and that was a time when the serious people who don't seem to talk to the press, or the press doesn't talk to them, the serious people were telling him that at best it's a stalemate. And he was pushing Germany and Western Europe to do more and more, put more and more arms in, and they were more and more skeptical, as they are. And so the whole point of what he did was he was worried about the German government, Scholl, and Germany is a huge industrial complex. Germany, they have the largest chemical company in the world, BASF, and they're car dealers, about Mercedes, they're the wonderful car dealers, the fancy car. They're an industrial combine, and they're cutting back. They don't have enough gas, and the gas is costing much more, even now, even though it's not the dead of winter. And people are putting their thermometers down to 60 or 58, and next year will be worse. And so Putin's obviously worry, I speculate, or I think is a personal rational thought, was that he's not going to be able to hold the Ukrainians, and at some point this fall, they're going to open up, and it's their power. The Germans can, he's not going to hold back the Europeans, I meant to say. He can't keep them, and they're going to eventually fall away. And at some point, Scholz, the German chancellor, is going to open up the pipeline because he's got a choice. Either keep on supporting a war that will not go anywhere, as many people in Europe believe, and they don't care that much about it. Ukraine's always been, who cares? It's one of the most corrupt countries in the world. Either keep on supporting them, or get enough gas to keep everybody, everything flowing and everybody warm and wealthy. Not only in Germany, but downstream and in other countries in Europe. There's no natural gas in Europe. And so what he's done is he's told even NATO and Western Europe that, well, we've had your back since World War II, but I'm going to push Ukraine. I want to mix it up with Putin. Politically, American presidents have always discovered war does wonderful things for their poll ratings. And by the way, it has for Putin too. The countries behind him. And whatever Biden's ambitions are for the next, 6 years, I think he sees it as tied up to winning this war in the Ukraine that he's not going to win. And so that's what the purpose of the pipeline was. And I'm telling you right now, there is no way this White House is going to ever admit what I'm not, even if somebody else breaks and says it happened, they're not going to admit that it happened. They just keep on denying. They have no options at this point. So that's why that's why you're talking to me. And that's why, every day I get, 10 or 12. I won't go to the Bundestag and go visit with parliamentarians, and I won't go to a conference in Germany. And for a lot of reasons, I don't talk to the Russians right now. One of the main reasons is that there's 500 different entities that call, 3 times a day. If I talk to one, I have to talk to all. This is an issue that is not going to go away, period. And you've got my soliloquy. I'll take your questions, Charlie. You've got better questions, I know, than I have answers for.
Well, no, thank you so much for taking this interview, Cy. When you say war does great things for presidents, it didn't do such great things for Lyndon Johnson. And that's why I found your follow-on piece on the Gulf of Tonkin to be also excellent and fascinating and thought-provoking.
Yes, but don't forget, Johnson did what he did by lying. Johnson got public support. He got the House and Senate to vote with only 2 dissenting votes in the Senate, Wayne Morse and Gruning, the 2 longtime, not necessarily radicals, but people on that issue, the war, knew we were making a mistake. Senator Fulbright voted for it. Anyway, and he did it on the basis of a lie. And you end up with, we say sometimes the number of dead in Vietnam, including non-combatants, of course, is between 2 and 3 million, as if it doesn't matter much. And we lost 58,000 dead, more than that, plus who knows how many wounded. And I can tell you that the psychological damage to the guys in the war was enormous, because by late 68, the guys knew it was a con. In the beginning, 66, they thought they were fighting communism. By 68, 69, the soldiers there knew, we just got to get to 12 months of this, pay our job and go back. They were drafted or volunteered. They knew that the story that they were being told didn't make sense to them, but but they did it. That's the thing about America. We do have people very loyalty to the state. I think Kennedy understood that to be a a good president. I know he did. His idea of the winning presidents were FDR and Lincoln, but both of them won wars. And I'm going to write about that more. I know more about it than I'll say here. And I think Johnson, once he made that lie, did have some. He got through. He won by enormous margin against Goldwater in the '64 election. And it wasn't until the war began to unravel a year or 2 later that he was out of the ballpark. But historically, what I remember is I was taking my boys. We went to a baseball game. I don't know whether it was in Baltimore or Washington. My team wasn't in Washington when Clinton was president, and he got into office in 63, won the election in 62. And he was in real trouble because he had this don't ask, don't tell. He supported gays in the military, which is accepted now, but back then was very radical. And the Joint Chiefs were in an uproar about it. And instead of doing the right thing, as the president should have done, which is to say, if you don't like it, resign, I'll take your resignation, he waffled around and he looked weak and unsure of himself. And in May or June, I remember being at a ball game and the announcement came, everybody who works for the U.S. government and certain jobs, and they named the Pentagon, please report for duty now. And so I made some calls. He was bombing Baghdad for the first time we had bombed a major country in the Middle East since World War II, since the war. He was bombing Baghdad, and he did so. 8 or 10 people were killed. He just hit a lot of structures there. And the next day he went to church, and it was the best day he's ever had. As he went to church, there's a church across the street from the White House. Reporters were there. He was mobbed. There were films of him going in and coming out. a real churchgoer. I mean, he, like everything else with Bill Clinton, a lot of it was for show. But anyway, it was the best day as president. And I saw that. I was there. I was at the ballpark, and what was I doing then? I don't know what I was doing. I think working probably for the New Yorker then. So I do believe that, I do think that Biden now sees his political chances being tied up with this war. You saw what he just did. He went to see Zelensky and made that, heroic. I don't know what's so brave about going, but it was considered brave by the press. And then he met with those members of the NATO in the part close to Ukraine, Poland, and Hungary, etc. He's in it. He's in it to play, and he's also in it against China. Yeah. And I can tell you, as somebody who watched us drift in the war, it does scare me. I don't want, I don't think a war with Russia would be very good for the United States.
Me either. I come at this whole process of looking at these issues from a finance background, and I see most recently $10 billion more going in for economic support in Ukraine. I see the number already over $100 billion. $100 billion, 110, 120, that's real money. And how do the people in Washington, D.C. on both sides of the aisle just look at this guy with obvious conflicts of interest, I think, reaching into Ukraine, involving Hunter and other members of his family? How come nobody's connecting the dots and saying, why, of all the countries in the world, of all the conflicts in the world, are we sending so much money so quickly with no real debate on what our goals are, what our exit strategy? I mean, it just is mind-numbing to me.
Let me move you one more step. And I'm talking now about things I know but haven't written, though, that I don't preclude doing it. Substack it's a great machine. I'm self-publishing. Mm-hmm. This is on me, what I do. The corruption there is a lot worse than they're telling you. And it starts with Zelensky, and it's to the point where there were even very quiet warnings to Zelensky suggesting that the generals around him are really quite pissed at him because he's taking more than his cut of the swag. I'm telling you, it's that bad. I don't know if the president knows that, but it's in the community that he's the money. All you have to do is look at the Panama Papers on the guy. He does have things abroad. I'm not suggesting he's not a patriot. I'm just suggesting that he's in a position now where he wants that war to continue till the last Ukraine dies, which will happen. I also, as I said at the beginning, I really don't think it's going very well for them. I also never thought, and again, I'm reflecting what I was being told, what I understood from some people inside who see a lot more than I do, that so many of the things from the beginning weren't true. The Russians, there's no question, we don't know what's in Putin's mind, but I'm sure he was surprised by the resistance when he first went in. I don't think he expected everybody to raise the white flag and surrender, as some people have suggested. But that whole move against Kiev, remember when he encircled Kiev? He was never going to, that I understood, I was being told from the beginning, he was never going to go into Kiev. As long as he could keep 60,000 of the best troops in Kiev, Ukrainian army, he was a winner. Yeah. In other words, the idea of that thing was not to attack Kiev. He still hasn't it. He's been throwing missiles at it, more in anger and taking out the heat. And all the electrical manufacturing stuff and all of the, I guess most of the energy ports have been hit once or twice, so they can always be fixed. But he never was going to go. So from the beginning, I always had a different view, but I thought the press stuff, it's for me, it's like when I was at the New York Times for 7 years, all this huzzabub about anonymous sources. I wrote amazing stories during Watergate when the president was on the rocks. I was the halcyon days for being. I left the New Yorker where I was working for the New York Times in 72 or 73, 72. Who would do that? I mean, the New Yorker then under William Shawn was Mecca. But I left because the editor of the Times, Abe Rosenthal, who was much more politically to the right than I am, said to me, something's wrong with the coverage in Washington. Go play, make whoopsie. And I have to tell you, whatever our differences about Israel and other places were, they were. He never second guessed me on anything. And I wrote a story about the CIA spying on American citizens with 7 anonymous sources. See, you got it right up. And I told the New York, it was a Sunday story, ran 7,000 words. I've been working on it for 2 years. I didn't tell the editor, Abe Rosenthal, until Friday morning. I had seen the head of the CIA had finally gotten enough that I knew anyway, whatever happened. I think, yeah, it's known now that I saw him, but then it wasn't Bill Colby. And I remember calling him from a payphone outside. We didn't have cell phones back then, primitive days. How did we ever exist? I called him up about 10 o'clock in the morning. I saw Bill maybe at 8 o'clock. I got to know him pretty well. By the way, mild manner. This guy was jumping behind enemy lines with the OSS in World War II. This is one really tough guy. Saw a lot of combat. Never talked much about it. Very interesting guy. Very high IQ. Anyway, I called the editor, my editor Rosenthal, up on Friday about 10 o'clock. I said, I've got a story I've been working on for a couple of years, and I now know it's true, so I want to write it. He said, what is it? He said, what? Go in and write. And they ran it that Sunday. Nobody said, who's the sources? Because they knew that I know what I'm doing. And it was, it changed everything. This is the New York Times now I don't recognize. I couldn't go to them because I don't know why. I guess, it can't be because of politics, because they'll run a story that's critical. It's just different. And it's not because they're less risky. It's just changed.
Sure.
And it's no fun. It's no fun anymore. So Substack is fun.
Yeah.
And by the way, I have editors. The editor I have is a really brilliant guy named Cliff Lorenzen, who edited me at the London Review for 3 or 4 pieces I did. They're very tough pieces. And the fact checkers we use right now, New Yorker guys that fact check for me at the New Yorker. It's the same high quality stuff as when I was at the New Yorker. And I couldn't go to the New Yorker. I couldn't go to the Washington Post. So I just tried Substack, and I'm not sorry because it's an amazing audience, and it's a lot of people. And I will tell you, it may just be the doom for some of these papers that are too busy playing hedge games. Yeah. And I don't know what's going on at the New York Times, but I didn't even think of going there.
Yeah. Well, one of the common threads in the 2 pieces about the Nord Stream and then about the Gulf of Tonkin is the involvement in Norway. And I think there's another dread adventure with Norway and Libya. We can park that for a second, but how do you explain or try to explain what Norway thought it was doing back in '64 and then in 2022? It just makes no sense.
Well, the thing that's amazing about the Norwegian thing is I knew nothing about it. I knew that this group went to Norway because they're great, they have 1,400 miles south of the Atlantic coastline. And by the way, Norway was one of the very hostile to everybody in the Baltic region. Sweden and Denmark are too. They really don't like the Russians very much. They don't seem as great neighbors, although there's a lot of trade and a lot of business and a lot of travel back and forth. They don't, and the last time I was in Russia was 4 or 5 years ago. And I saw somebody in the Politburo who hostile to Putin. Everybody I saw didn't like Putin. It's just like here in America where you have a president you don't like. I didn't see any, he has a lot of control, but people are not afraid to tell a Western journalist how much, what a pain in the ass he is. Anyway, to go on from that, it doesn't make him a good guy for starting a war. Nobody should have started. He started the bloodiest war in Europe since World War II, and that's going to be on his soul forever. See, there's my other phone that I wanted to turn off, but I just grabbed it. It's okay.
Thanks.
It's like this starting at 7, but that's okay. It's fun. That's what I'm in the business for. So when we started the project, it was authorized by obviously by Biden through Jake Sullivan. His I'm not very respectful of Jake Sullivan and Victoria Nuland, the undersecretary, and Tony Blinken, Anthony Blinken, all of whom have this, rigorous sort of instinctive feeling that they can tell Russia and China what to do and yell and yip at them and not have any consequences. I call them wink and blink and a nod. If you had children, read stories to them, I think they're way over their head, and I don't think they're not dumb, but they're just way over their head. And anyway, when they got the assignment, and you understand, and this is December of 2021, it was before Christmas, and the White House reached out to the community through, I guess, the guy that runs the CIA, Bill Burns. I'd say something nice about him, but that would get him in trouble. He's unlike outsiders who come in. He's figured out how to be a success there, unlike others who never could. I'm thinking about Liam Panetta and even Pompeo. Outsiders, you have to know how to deal with the operational people, because a lot of them are, like what I said, very, very mindful that their oath of office is to the Constitution while they're doing things for the presidency that they shouldn't be doing anyway. So Jake organizes an interagency group, the usual ones: CIA, NSA, State, Treasury, you name it, JCS, and with the idea being, this is before Christmas, we need options about how to stop. Is there some way of the Russians are building up in Belarus, and the issue is, is there some way? Give us some options. And in the meetings, I used sort of a term of art in what I wrote that should have told some of those guys that I without quite saying it, I described a room that's usually very sacrosanct in an office building next to the White House that they use for these meetings, very secure, sealed, steel walls or whatever it is, lead and whatever it is. And they met there, and the question that was raised, do we want actions that are reversible or irreversible? What they meant by that, reversible would be more sanctions. And, let's talk about Cuba. They've been sanctioned since '61. How are they doing? Sanctions in the long run don't do it. And so the irreversible sanctions are kinetic stuff. And so out of this, there were meetings. And by January, it was agreed. There were people there very experienced and stuff, and they agreed they could do it. They could get it done. It would be very hard, but there is a way to do it. And so here's these guys who live in the black and do their operations, and and don't talk about it, really don't. After the fact, if they have a problem with it, maybe that's when I'll hear about something, but not during it, I'll tell you that much. And so they tell the White House that sometime after January, and don't forget, we're a month and a half away from Putin going in, and it's clear he's going in. At some point in early February, you saw the hospital trucks with the operating rooms in them, and all that stuff moving up, and so it's going to be a go. And he's been saying it anyway, and saying he's going to do it. And so the people doing this stuff, they always saw it as, let's add to the book we have that might, the package we have that might make Putin think twice. And being able to blow up a pipeline isn't such a bad idea. The first pipeline of Russian gas started in 2011, and Europe got rich and fat on it. And it was, as the White Houses since the Kennedy days have been saying, we really worry about Russia weaponizing its gas. Russia has millions, all kinds of gas, can run forever on the Russian gas, methane gas, and it's oil. In the various parts, when you get going towards going east towards Siberia and all that stuff, just loaded with fields, and that was always a political concern of us. In any case, so what happens after they tell the White House that? Within a couple of weeks, Victoria Nuland, the undersecretary, I don't think had played a big role in really what was the American overthrow of a pro-Russian government in Ukraine in 2014. She was heard on a wiretap, a conversation she had that was all over the world. She says in a news conference or a briefing about Nord Stream 2, that's the new one that was sanctioned. That one was started 5-6 years ago. It was built. That's a 750-mile pipeline through the Baltic Sea, a steel pipeline covered by concrete. It's a piece of work. I mean, it's tough. And to blow it up is tough. And she says, we can stop Nord Stream 2. That will not happen. Russia should know that by any means or by all means or something like that. And 2 weeks later, the president, having been briefed obviously on this, at a news conference with Schultz is there, he said, well, Nord Stream 2 will not happen. And a reporter says, well, how? What do you mean? How can you stop it? We can do it. Let me assure you, we will be able to do it. It was as close a threat as you can make. And the guys in Norway, they're working out why Norway? Norway has all this, as I say, a 1,400-mile border that goes, they meet the Russia at the Arctic Sea, and it's loaded up north as you get up closer to the Arctic Ocean. It's loaded with surveillance stuff. We have a very advanced radar we built. We upgraded there. We have a Navy base, the submarine base that we rebuilt. I guess it was used in World War II. That we have. There's a big major Norwegian Navy base in which there's planes. We supplied them with some Boeing surveillance planes. They bought about 5 of them in the last 3 years. We're spending a lot of money in Norway. But the other thing is they have moxie when it comes to working on water. And they were able to get us to a place where we could actually divers could go in covertly. It's only 260 feet down where the bottom. It's probably the shallowest part of the Baltic Sea and the most less vulnerable to tidal waves because it's a very, very a lot of water flowing there. The Baltic Sea, basically, they call it empties every year. It's very churning, a lot of lakes flowing into it, a lot of pollution too, but they're fighting that. It's a huge sea. Anyway, so the Norwegians were used for that, I always thought. And then I learned, as I reported this stuff, the Norwegians were all over the dirty war we ran against North Korea, undeclared war. And they had built an advanced PT boat, much better than the one that Jack Kennedy was in. You know, they're pretty useless, our World War II boats, but they built a very good one. It has a funny name, the Nasty something. And we bought about 20 of them. And then we had a big black, this is what I wrote about, I think just this week, and we had a big black operation going with the Norwegians. And what I learned was, there's been some reporting about it. Some of the people in the program, 10 years ago, talked on a TV show in Norway, 2 of them. So we learned something that way. But basically, it was much bigger than anybody knew as I began to ask questions about it. And whereas it was described as we were just going along and on shore points, maybe engaging with some shore patrols or some of the South Vietnamese PT boats in a secret program, we really were using the Norwegian boats and U.S. Navy SEALs, who are plenty good operators, to go deep into North Vietnam and do things like hit radar sites and God knows what else. And we actually had, this was amazing to me, we had 2 SEALs badly wounded. And courageously, they managed to walk their way to the coast where they were rescued. And the whole rescue business, by the way, of which I know something about, is the most amazing things we were doing. We were rescuing guys shot down in Laos, shot down in Vientiane. We were close to Vientiane. We were getting guys along the Ho Chi Minh Trail that got captured. In the black, there's a lot of heroics that went out that nobody wants to talk about. These 2 guys got Medal of Honors in secret. So Norway's, and now since then people have written me, and I know much more about the Norwegian operations, all of which were used to try to provoke. The message in the beginning was to the North in early 64 on, stop helping the South. Stop helping your fellow communists or what they are, the Vietnamese, we call them the Viet Cong. Many of them were nationalists. By the way, after the war, some of the more aggressive members of the Viet Cong, the Vietmen, they were a nationalist party, more so than communists, were put into gulags too by the North. They didn't like the leaders of the Viet Cong in the South who were not communists, who really just wanted a country free of communism and democracy. They locked them up just as much as the regular people who were actually in the government at the time. Tough people, the North. And by the way, for those who believe still that the American policy of containment is so wonderful, the argument we made publicly for going into from going to South Vietnam is we have to go there because we can't need North Vietnam. If they get in, China's going to get in. They're going to take over all of that peninsula, and we were in struggles in Laos and Cambodia also with the communist governments, and so the whole idea is we had to contain communism in Southeast Asia. So what happens is in 75, you remember those scenes where on our embassy, everybody's jumping off and all the Vietnamese are trying to climb in. So when Saigon fell, June, I remember, in late spring of 675, within 2 weeks, the government we supported in Cambodia fell. And with another couple of weeks, the government we supported in Vientiane fell. And so we had three countries that had, two of them had distinctly pro-communist, and one was more leaning communist, but certainly not democratic. We had the whole Southeast Asia fell essentially to the communist or pro-communist governments. Three fell. And everything we thought of happened, that the worst could happen, happened. And so what happened? And somebody was telling me this the other day, somebody who knows more about this than I do, somebody from the world that I know about. And he said, so what happened? He said. And I said, you tell me. He said, nothing. Nothing. You know, the containment notion is the most overrated. He said, who is the biggest trading partner right now of the Vietnamese? It's the United States. All that talk about it, we have to contain China, contain this. And so the whole time when we were fighting Mao in 53, 54, when he took over, really tough SOB. And our allies, the Britons, were trading with him from 54, 53, 54 on. And it was Mao who told Ho Chi Minh, who just beat the French in Dien Bien Phu, and wanted to go take the rest of the country, which he could have done easily. Mao and Pham Dong and and Zhou Enlai told him at the Geneva Convention, "You're not going to take the South." And he said, "Yes, I am." They said, "You're not going because you'll bring the Americans in, and we don't want them. It'll be, we don't." And he didn't do it. He couldn't fight China.
You mentioned Jake Sullivan, and Jake Sullivan was front and center saying that he had everything under control in what I call Afghanistan, on our exit there. He was centrally involved in the debacle with every debacle with Hillary Clinton. What is the source of Jake Sullivan's backing at this point?
I would say it was Strobe Talbot, basically. Strobe Talbot was he was a scholar. He met Bill Clinton. They were Rhodes Scholars together. Strobe's a very bright guy, and I must say, as a neighbor, I've known him for 40 years, from the 60s on, and I've known his family. He married into a family I know well, and so Strobe's always been. He translated Khrushchev's memoirs. He's always been very hostile to Russia, and he was when he was in the State Department as Undersecretary of State, I think that was his title. He was one of those people who pushed for the expansion of NATO, and openly. No secret about it. He was open about it. And I don't know if Jake Sullivan met him there, maybe there, but Strobe then went on to Brookings. He ran Brookings, and Jake was a deputy. And so Jake was into that notion that for most of your readers, I think some of the people who watch your show might know this, but Russia came out of World War II as a pretty much hated country, and totally hated, particularly among its European neighbors. He just spent more than a decade, bombing and killing and raping and mutilating, and so there was no love for Russia, no love for Russia, and so what happened? I'm just looking at my wife for a second. I'm getting a message that says, "Why are you still doing interviews?" Anyway,
we'll let you go in a few minutes, though.
Oh, listen, let me tell you, she's more tired of the story than I am. Anyway, so Sullivan was working for him, and that's where he nurtured this instinctive anti-communist stuff. And he's, he's one of these people with a great pedigree, good pedigree that got him to be chief of staff, obviously head of the national security advisor to the president, for which he's, I think, eminently unqualified. And and so and for Hillary, he was part of the gang that took care of the Gmail, and that's a story we'll never get straight because she's out of office, and who cares when she's out of office? That was always a very troubling story to me. I was always hearing different things from the community than the press was about it. And
have you spoken to Strobe Talbot about that email issue? I think the Brookings Institution has a lot to do with it.
No, I don't know where Strobe would be on that. I don't know. No, I haven't talked to him about it. I don't think he, Strobe actually, it's funny. He was actually not in a funny way. He was very hard set on Russia, and he certainly knew foreign policy. But he, in a funny way, he was straight. I once learned something about Clinton. I just want to learn something about Clinton. Maybe 10 years ago, from a CIA guy that was a White House advisor. And 10 years later, and like a lot of guys in the CIA, when they retire, because there's such a specialized job, they don't have a lot of, they're not that easily fitted in business.
Right.
They could become consultants. And this guy ended up working for an American company that was doing due diligence when the Russians were buying a lot of real estate here at some point, in the 80s and 90s. I'm sure you know that, Charlie. There was a lot of Russian investment.
Oh, sure.
Some of it not so clean, as you know.
Right.
A lot of it not so clean. And he was part of a group of ex-CIA guys that had a small company that would work with some of the former KGB guys on due diligence, and give advisors that they'd be paid by companies. Who are these Russians? And so this guy had also worked in the White House, and I had a terrible fight with him. Oh, he was really mad at me about something, at that point in the 80s. And so we had this big fight. And then about 2000, maybe Clinton's out of office already. Bush and Cheney are in. He calls me one day and says, "Let's have lunch." And he gives me some information that's really interesting, that goes to something about Clinton. Clinton had already been in a grand jury, and he survived that. And so I'm thinking it was something about World Bank money, it was his Russian colleagues gave him stuff from the KGB that he translated, and I checked the translation. It was perfect. I got a bunch of documents about, Clinton was on an airplane and he was speaking on an open line. He was very indiscreet, and the Russians copied it. And so anyway, it gave me a lead, and we had this pleasant lunch, and I took it seriously, and I'm thinking to myself, who do I go to on this? Strobe? No, because you wouldn't tell Strobe. And Strobe's attitude towards Russia was on the record. Werner Jordan, that's the guy to go to. Werner was, he was the wingman for Bill Clinton on all that, all that stuff we know about. So I went to see him that summer, where my family vacations in the summer is. He's got a place down about half a mile away, and I used to walk the dog down in the morning and talk to Vernon. He's always a lot of fun. He passed away. That's why I'm telling you the story. So it was 7:30. I'm out there walking early with my dog, and he's up early too, sitting in his yard, and play golf a lot. And so we have some coffee, and I tell him my story. And I said, "So what do you?" I tell him the whole story. I'm not telling you the details. Sure. This is one of these things about being a reporter. It's so much fun in Washington. And I've known Vern is a very charming, interesting guy, but he's not going to give up. He's not going to tell you what's really going on. That was his claim to fame. And when I got all done, he went back to his old Southern accent. He grew up in South Bend, Indiana. He was about as much. I grew up in Chicago. We didn't speak with a Southern accent there anyway either. He got in a Southern accent. He said, "Oh, Si," he said, "all I can say to you is, that man had lied to the grand jury." It's a no. I have no idea what he meant, but you guys are good with pictures. It's just one of those things about being a Washington reporter. It's so much fun. I didn't care. He was out of office, and let him go. I don't care. He's actually a pretty charming guy. And he was in politics, in Democratic politics when I was for a little bit in 50, 68, 69. So I knew his people. And by the way, bright. He and Hillary, really smart. I don't think we've had. He was bright. Obama was bright enough. We haven't had much since then. I mean, Carter was okay, but there were so many blind spots to him. I should speak bad of somebody who's in ill. Probably the best president we've ever had out of office. I mean, the one that once he was out of office, he was really a beacon of. I just thought I had a lot of respect for him afterwards. I didn't like him when he was in that much. But when we go to bright presidents, you're talking about Lincoln, not much. Kennedy was okay, great letter writer, witty and funny, but too busy doing other things than his job. And so
Jefferson.
I think Obama was. Where are we getting into all this stuff? Charles, ask me a question.
Yeah, well, I know your wife is probably saying it's almost lunchtime, so we've got.
She's just saying, she's not saying that at all. She couldn't care about that. She's just saying, shut up.
So you've been happily married forever, I guess. So I've been noticing the pattern. I'm not asking you to give anything away. I wait till each Wednesday morning when I get up early, and I know I'll be checking Substack to see what you have next, whether it's Wednesday or another day. Can we rely on you to pound for a while on these various stories?
Oh yeah. No, this is. As I told you, he's never going to admit anything. But you're going to see. There's a lot more going on.
Good.
I don't ever want to write anything that's going to jeopardize an American boy in the field. You know what I mean?
Right.
And we there's more. We're fudging a lot. We have a unit. It's either, I don't remember whether it's the 82nd or 101st. We have them very close in Poland. We have a whole brigade there, I think. What the hell is that about? I didn't. And the NATO stuff is getting creepy with more stuff creeping in. And I'm sure there's the usual amount of black units and covert units that we have doing paramilitary, trying to mostly train allegedly and teach people. We've given the Ukrainians weapons they can't possibly do. The Patriot missile, Patriot missile. It's $1 million a shot, and it takes about 6 months or 8 months to learn how to use it, and then you really have to know how to use it.
Right.
And the odds, I don't even know if it started to arrive yet. It's going to have no bearing on anything. The M1 tank we've given them runs on high octane fuel that if they don't use the very best fuel, it'll break down. And it's full of automatic equipment, and you have to train people on it. And it's going to be hard to do so because this is an advanced weapon. Even though it's been it's just not going to have the use you think it's going to be used, and it's going to be targeted right away by Russian missiles. And the Russians, despite all the talk, they have upgraded their military. The problem is, for me, is that if I start talking about the competence of the Russians, I get beat up so badly for being pro-Russian. Or am I doing? You can't believe some of the interviews. Do you like Putin? And differentiating Putin couldn't have pulled off this war 2 years ago because the public support in Russia would not have been for it. They're trading like crazy. It's become a tourist mecca. There's Four Seasons hotels in St. Petersburg or Leningrad, but you will, in also in Moscow. The hotels are wonderful. The restaurants are wonderful. There's trade galore. People are making a lot of money. I had to drink when I was last in Russia with the guy, a friend of mine. And what's his business? He sells yachts to Russians. And
hope he paid for the drink.
He could be a guy in Florida for all I know. You know what I mean? Yeah. And none of them like Putin. His rating was, Putin to get to go into war with a 30 or 40% rating and people wanting him to, that's impossible. So what we did with all the rhetoric, once this gang, Winkin, Blinken, and Nod got in, once they got in and the president started, and it was popular at first by hitting him very hard, Putin very hard, he brought the population slowly up more and more to the point where Putin would have him behind him.
Yeah.
In other words, our rhetoric made it easier for Putin to make a decision to go to war. You can't go to war if 30% of the public doesn't want it.
Right.
You just can't. And so I'm not saying they caused it, but it's just fascinating to me that we played a card. Within 3 months of being in office, Tony Blinken met with the Chinese in Alaska and was telling them how to run their life. You remember that. The Chinese responded exactly the way you would. I had lunch with somebody from China the other day, somebody Chinese, let's put it that way, who knew an awful lot. And he was saying to me, your Secretary of State waggled his finger publicly at his, and I'm sure the briefing paper would have said, you don't do things like that.
Right.
Let's do things like that. And so I'm staying on this issue. And I don't think there's any pattern of me being pro-Russian. I'm pro-American all the way. I'm what shocked me about My Lai is I was in the Army and I knew the people I was in. And I don't think any of them would have done what they did.
Right.
But that's what happens in war. You get trained in the stupid stuff. I was a grunt. I wasn't much of a shoulder. In fact, that was awful. I like the physical part of it, but the mental part of it doesn't exist. Anyway.
Do you think your reporting is taking on a new life after yesterday's meeting at the UN where Jeffrey Sachs and Ray McGovern spoke in support of what you've been saying, and all the United States could say is it's false? They offered no countermanding evidence.
And, I know Ray. I know Ray in a funny way because he's very involved in Christian goodwill, and my wife is also, supported a group in a tough part of the city, Washington, where it's a house where young mothers without any help, teenage mothers could leave their baby there from very early on all day and then work and come back and pick up the kid and be given the reading list for that kid. They have to read at night to them, that kind of a place, which is very important, as you know. If you don't read to the kids between 0 to 5, you lose them. And so Ray was on that board. That's the only way I knew Ray. He was on the board with her. I didn't know him at all, but I didn't know I knew he was in the CIA, but 27 years and being that his testimony was that he was one of the major principals in the strategic talks on ABM and other stuff. And I asked somebody since then, of course, he was a major player in there. He's very bright. And Sachs, of course, he certainly knows Russia well. His wife I think his wife did business there when he was at Harvard. There's a lot of stuff. And so I don't know him at all, but we know how bright he is. I was surprised to see it. I don't think the New York, maybe the Washington Post did a story on it. Somebody told me about it. I didn't see it in the paper, but the New York Times hasn't written a story about this yet. They could even write a story about, this crazy Hersh is once again shooting off his mouth and making noise, and he doesn't have a source, and he's not naming the source, as if I named the source, as if I put anybody who spoke to me in any meeting, I would be jeopardizing him. What else can you do? I'm not, God, I'm so old, I know how to protect people. Yeah. Nobody's ever gone to jail because of talking to me. I want to inspire people to start looking.
I wouldn't bet against you.
One final question. You mentioned William Colby, and obviously there's been a lot of talk lately about the church committee hearings and all of that. Do you think that what they're doing now remotely resembles the church committee hearings, or do you think the church committee hearings succeeded in what they were attempting to do?
I'm sure Chuck Schumer, leader of the majority there, I know it's by 2, but he's got it. I'm sure he's going to convene a big and insist that we have an investigation into the Democratic presidents and possible destruction of a pipeline that could lead to who knows what in the long term for NATO and for Germany and Western Europe in terms of their feelings about us. There's Colby, Bill Colby. He's testifying. To his credit, he testified honorably about the stuff I wrote about domestic spying back then. He's a very interesting, much more complicated person than I ever thought would be. Dick Helms was also the leader of the CIA, and before he died, I'd been, yipping and yapping at the CIA for years about their operations, and about Chile and other stuff, Allende. Before he died, he called me in. Went to see him, wanted to see me at his house, and what he just wanted to tell me was, "Goddamn Kennedys, they made me do it." And he said, I had to take the heat for them. That's the job. And his point being that, as I think I wrote in that first piece, was that our job in the CIA is, do we work for the Constitution or the Crown? Well, we don't. We work for the Crown. And the power of the CIA, and this is one of the parts of it that makes me very nervous. The President of the United States can't get anything done with Congress. He can't get anything done with Congress, but he could take a walk with the director of the CIA. These are in the old days. I'm not sure it exists today. And he could take a walk in the Rose Garden for 10 minutes, and somebody 8,000 miles is going to get hurt the next day. And that's our kind of power that he shouldn't have. And Helms resented it, but that was the job, and that's what he did. And anyway, I got to go see what's going on in my house, and you guys got to go back to your world.
Well, thanks so much.
Yeah, well, Charles, you and I go back to something very interesting, and we never finished it, did we?
I think we will.
Never's not over yet.
With Jeff Girth, remember?
I absolutely do, and I'm eager to try to finish it.
Well, I don't know if it's worth it. There's too many other issues right now, Chaz. But you were sure into it. You showed a lot of leg on that stuff, buddy. That's why I'm talking to you. Goodbye. Talk to you guys.
Thank you,
Thank you so much, Mr. Hersh,
Bye-bye.
for joining us and for the work that you're doing. Have a great afternoon.
It's nice here today. Where are you?
In New
We're
York.
in New York right now.
It's not snowing there yet or anything like that yet.
Not yet.
Do you think G.H.W. Bush had anything to do with the canoe accident that took William Colby?
Oh, no. He was a sailor. Bad weather. I don't think there's any evidence of that. I mean, I did look at it because everybody said so. In a boating accident. He sailed a lot by himself. And you could get in trouble in the Chesapeake like any place else. No, I don't think so. I really don't think so. I mean, I don't think so.
All right.
Thanks for joining us. Have a great
again,
day.
Cy. We'll stay in touch.
Bye-bye.
Well, there you go, Charles. Great interview with the legendary Cy Hersh.
That was much more than we expected, and unfortunately, I also have to dash because I've got to hightail it out of town. But it was an honor, a privilege.
And people know that I wasn't lying the other day.
What?
People know I wasn't lying the other day.
There you go. Unless, how could we be sure that was
the real Cy Hersh? It could have been a deep fake.
It could have been an actor.
Check. Yeah. But anyway, I want to thank.
Fantastic interview, interlocutor. It was great to have him on, and I'm so excited to hear that so much more will be coming.
Absolutely. And thanks to everybody who sponsors the show and makes this kind of thing possible. If you enjoyed watching this, please become a sponsor. Without sponsors, I can't continue, and interviews like this will not happen in the future. So please become a sponsor on subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, or odyssey.com/@crowdsourcethetruth. And I would also recommend that people visit charlesortel.substack.com.
Thank you.
Join Charles's Substack. He's going to start publishing on there. And of course, SeymourHersh.substack.com. Another big thank you to our guest, Seymour Hersh, and thanks to you, Charles, for taking time out of your day on this Friday. I'll be back later today with John Cullen. Don't miss that. And if you're a sponsor, you're going to be able to watch that on Subscribestar, Patreon, and Odyssey. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Have a great afternoon.